The action begins as all spring up. Fierce Tybalt is told that a fellow Montague is nearby. He and his friend start fighting, and as they move toward Benvolio Montague, the latter attempts to pull them apart. However, the hate between them is so strong that he's drawn into the fight and the two are at each other's throats. Benvolio Montague is not so eager to fight at first, but Tybalt's insults enrage him, so he swings his knife fearlessly as his opponent leans back, away from the blow. As they both go toward the ground, we hear a thin noise of unsheathed steel, and as all the people around try to pull the fighters apart, we see blood on it and suspect that the actors went too far. However, the quarrel stops as soon as the prince comes in to put an end to it. The clashing family is gathered around him, so he furiously demands that these chaotic quarrels in the streets of Verona cease immediately. He threatens that the next time the peace between the citizens of Verona is disturbed, Montagues and Capulets will have to pay the price with their lives. Finally, he calls Capulet to go along with him now and orders Montague to visit him this afternoon. In the following scene, as Benvolio's wound is taken care of, Lord Montague asks his nephew about what happened. Tybalt is the head of all misunderstandings, with his sword always prepared, and the lord is curious about where Romeo was at that time. And so, for the first time, we see him, leaning on a ladder, completely swallowed by something. His gaze is directed toward nothing in particular. Romeo is as discreet as any man can be, so the reason for this sorrowful temper remains unknown. Benvolio, however, decides to put an end to this. He goes up to him, asking what sorrow lengthens his hours. It seems like Romeo is in love, but his insides are contradicted. His love is unanswered, and the opposite feelings of love, hate, and sorrow are mixed in his stomach, creating a potent poison of melancholy. His cousin advises him to forget about this Rosaline and move on. However, before Romeo can resist that idea, a girl arrives with the letter. She doesn't know how to read and asks Romeo to do it for her. Later she tells them that her mistress, the lad Capulet, is having an occasion for her guests, and she is to find them in Verona and ask them to come. A broad smile stretches across Romeo's face as he reads out the name of Rosaline among others. Finally, the girl offers him to come as well, only if he's not of the house Montague. Meanwhile, Lady Capulet is walking with Paris, letting him know that she would like him to be her daughter's betrothed. In truth, the upcoming feast is only a diversion from the real intent of the Capulets. They want Paris to meet Juliet and gain her consent as well. In the next scene, Lady Capulet enters her room, and for the first time, we see Juliet, sitting on her bed with her nurse. The latter is sent away and the mother and the daughter are left alone to speak in secret. However, suddenly, Lady Capulet calls her back and asks her to speak of her daughter's beauty when she was a child. Soon, the nurse is so emotional that Capulet asks her to keep her peace and moves toward Juliet to lure her into the notion of being married. Juliet considers getting married a huge honor. Then, the mother takes her time, raises the bouquet in her hands slightly, and puts it down on Juliet's lap, saying with a delightful tone that the vibrant Paris seeks her love. The nurse is out of this world from happiness, so she and Lady Capulet begin boasting about Paris's perfect candidacy. Finally, Lady Capulet tells her that today, upon the feast, she shall meet him and try to find her love in his eyes. So, Juliet, being an obedient daughter, replies that she will follow their advice directly. As the supper is over, Mercutio and Benvolio try to encourage Romeo to get inside and blend in. Romeo, however, is pinned to the ground by the weight of his love. Then, Mercutio starts an emotional monologue. Amused by his eloquence, he says that love is light and weightless. It's like his dream the other night, a dream of a fairy that travels through people's minds and teaches them how to love. Benvolio then adds to that, hurrying Romeo, urging that the supper is already over and they might be late. But Romeo fears that something bad is going to happen. He had a dream, full of bad omens, and now he feels as if a claw of death is hanging over him, waiting to see him enter this party. And so, it must be happy that its wish is coming true. Romeo leaves it all to fate and they go inside as a huge metal curtain goes up. The way toward the raging party is open. As the herd of ravers surrounds Romeo, he suddenly sees Juliet, standing above all and singing some otherworldly tune. The vision of a singing girl among the swinging hands and swirling hips captures Romeo in an instant. He asks Benvolio who she is, but he doesn't recognize her. So, Romeo is left alone with the feeling that comes with the voice and the vision of this stranger girl that illuminates the purest light and enlivens something incredibly powerful inside him. As Romeo stands still, Tybalt recognizes his voice. He smells Montague's like a beast of prey. He checks him out and orders his servant to bring him a knife. To use it on a Montague that has come treacherously to pervert their peace is no sin for him. This sudden shift of Tybalt isn't unnoticed by Lady Capulet. She approaches him and we witness a clash of two powers. One, young and bold, and second, seasoned and authoritative. She demands that Tybalt forgets about Romeo being here. The sword mustn't be raised here, and her home where numerous important people are gathered. Tybalt tries to change her mind, saying that he can't just stand here and swallow the insult. But eventually, Lady Capulet makes him yield. So Romeo is free to roam the dance floor. It seems like he and Juliet are about to encounter one another when Lady Capulet steals her away, and introduces her to some noble guests. From Juliet's expression, though, it's evident that she saw Romeo and the two exchanged glances. Suddenly, the notion of meeting her future lover, whom her mother has chosen for her, seems much less interesting than the dance floor in which a mysterious man roams hidden. So, as Juliet stands in front of the guests, she looks across the room, trying to find Romeo, not realizing that he's just behind her. He leans toward her ears and the words come drifting down from his mouth, filled with tenderness and wild love. He knows his rough and unworthy touch might ruin the holy shrine that is Juliet's hands, so he vows to make amends by soothing them with his tender kiss. Most women would have been taken aback by this witty line, but Juliet replies with equal cleverness. She says that Romeo denounces his own hands too much, and if her hands are so holy, then he shall kiss them with his palms as pilgrims kiss the saints. And so, palm to palm they kiss for the first time. The whole party loses its meaning around them. As they run away, everything disappears. Now, Romeo intends to use his lips for kissing, for both pilgrims and saints have lips, but Juliet doesn't right away give him that privilege. The lips are for praying and one must stand still while praying. So Romeo leans closer, whispering that this kiss will cleanse him from all his sins, and if she must stand still, then he'll be the one committing this noble sin. He kisses her. His sins make their way to Juliet's lips, and as they break apart, Romeo longs to taste them once more. In a blink of an eye, however, Juliet's nurse appears from nowhere and swiftly steals her away, whispering nervously that Lady Capulet wants to speak with her. Of course, it's only an excuse, and so, both lovers find out the truth. Their families are enemies. Romeo is dumbfounded by the fact that the girl that just won his heart is a Capulet, and all the terrible consequences of this inevitable love flash before Juliet's eyes too. In the dark of the night, Benvolio and Mercutio crawl out of the party. They seem very amused. Trying to conjure their lost friend, they shout his name, but when they realize that he's nowhere near, they make their way across the street, stumbling on their drunken feet. However, it turns out that Romeo is there. He has made a decision. There is nowhere to go but with her. So, in the next scene, we see Juliet looking across her balcony as Romeo comes near. Juliet thinks she's alone. And so, as Romeo sneaks beneath her balcony, she reveals her love. She speaks to the night, and from her heart comes a sullen despair that the only thing standing between them is their names. But Romeo is not his name. He would be as sweet and as perfect as now if he was called something else. She wished they could strip away their origin and make way for their love, and as she says those last words, Romeo speaks up. He would gladly change his name if it meant being with her. Juliet stumbles back in an instant, scared by this sudden appearance, but soon she realizes who it is. She urges him to leave, for if her kinsmen find him here, blood will surely be spilled. But Romeo is not scared. A knight's cloak is protecting him from any unwanted eyes, and besides, he prefers dying from his love rather than from the lack of it. The lover's audacity is the only boundary that love has, so the knives and the hatred of Capulet cannot stop him. Mesmerized by Romeo's boldness, Juliet is glad that knight's cloak hides away her blushing cheeks too, and as she stands and holds his face in her palms, they reveal their love. A heavy knocking on the door disturbs their harmony. Now they say their vows in a rush. Romeo is afraid that this dreamlike vision will vanish as soon as it is over, but Juliet reassures him, saying that their infinite love shall be strengthened by marriage. So she urges him to tell her tomorrow where they shall meet, and she will leave behind all her life to follow him throughout the world. In the following scene, Friar Lawrence, the priest of Verona, makes an herbal drink from a plant that heals if smelled and kills when consumed. As the morning breaks, he puts a small flask full of this liquid on his table, and this is the moment when Romeo strides inside. Immediately, Friar tells him that his raw expressions and his arrival at this hour demonstrate that something of utmost importance has happened to his life. Romeo assures him that he had the sweetest rest this night. Naturally, the priest suspects that something unholy was played out between him and Rosaline, but Romeo abruptly denies it, saying that Rosaline is the name, long forgotten. And when Friar asks him where he has been then, Romeo tells him the plain truth. He's in love with the daughter of Lord Capulet, and this love flows both ways. Without any ado, Romeo hastily states that this kind of love requires marriage. Friar Lawrence is a holy man. He puts all his trust into the power of love. Therefore, he sees a great opportunity to put an end to the bloody enmity between two great houses by this wedding. That morning, Mercutio and Benvolio are searching for Romeo in the streets of Verona. From their brief conversation, we understand that Tybalt has sent a letter to Romeo's father, a challenge that Romeo will or will not answer. There's no denying his good-heartedness, for sure. However, Tybalt is the fiercest warrior, and all hearts tremble before his sword. Before Mercutio can finish his artistic description of Tybalt's swordsmanship, however, Romeo appears on the street. He shortly assures them that he left them for a great reason last night. Suddenly, they hear the voice of Juliet's nurse, calling Petta to fetch her a fan. Mercutio darts forward, making mockery jokes. But the nurse isn't here for some wordplay. She's looking for Romeo, and they, of all the people, must know where he is. So they call him and leave the street, amused and in the mood to make fun of everything around them. Finally, Romeo and the nurse are alone. It turns out that she's sent from Juliet as they agreed last night. But the nurse's attitude is weary at first. If it's a fool's paradise that Romeo is leading Juliet to, then he will have to pay for his misleading. but Romeo's intentions are the opposite. Explosively, the nurse expresses her happiness and steps away, but Romeo stops her. There's more he wants to convey to his love. This afternoon she must come to Friar Lawrence's cell, where they shall be shrined and married. Hearing these sweetly articulated words, the nurse gasps from overwhelming positive emotions. She acts as if she's soaked in happiness. However, as soon as Romeo leaves and she turns to Petta, her voice becomes weary and her expressions are impatient. We see why when she goes back to Juliet, sad and nervous. She hesitates to speak, but Juliet is hasty. She needs to hear the news now, or she'll explode from expectation. So, the nurse hisses back at her, abominating Juliet's choice. But finally, she proves to be a good-hearted and sincere person. She tells her the truth, and even though she's not very fond of Romeo, smiles wholeheartedly, saying that he's waiting for her in Friar Lawrence's cell today. They are to be wed there and start a whole new life together. Juliet, completely lost in overwhelming joy, jumps up from her bed and embraces the nurse firmly. And so, that afternoon she goes to Friar Lawrence's cell, where Romeo is waiting for her. They face each other and kneel before the priest. After a brief moment, it's as if the space is completely emptied around them. This is a moment of pure happiness when nothing stands between them but the candlelight and the otherworldly chanting of a priest. They lean closer and closer to each other, and as their lips touch, the scene abruptly changes. It's Mercutio and Benvolio, sitting on the street, and their lips are glued together too. Passionately, they embrace each other, until suddenly Mercutio's eyes open and he looks at something wearily. She stands up and faces Tybalt, just finishing his human needs. He slowly turns to Mercutio, and as they are beginning their cold confrontation, Benvolio leaps up and urges them to move somewhere more private, where fewer gazes will be pointed at them. But Mercutio isn't so eager to go anywhere. Suddenly, Tybalt raises his head and calls for Romeo, who just arrived on the street. He's the one he wants to quarrel with, the one that stained his family's honor. So he calls him out, describing Romeo as a pure villain. But now Romeo is wed to a Capulet. He no longer feels loathing toward this vain man, standing in front of him, urging him to face him in combat. Tybalt slides a knife toward him, ordering him to face him in a fair fight. And to everyone's surprise, a sudden tide of pure philanthropy swallows Romeo whole. He's so purified by the recent events that he kneels, raises his hands, and tells him to be satisfied. As a hateful person as Tybalt is, he opens his knife, but before he can plunge forward to end Romeo's life, Mercutio stands between them. The two engage in combat, and before we know it, everything turns into chaos. Bodies mingle with each other until, as they break apart, we see blood on Mercutio's wounded stomach. Tybalt and his companion run away swiftly. Mercutio can't stay on foot anymore. He sits down, looking at Romeo, cursing and damning this ancient, mindless feud between two rich families that killed him. Being silent is all Romeo can do. Rage starts to fume inside of him. These past days have softened him, so that his closest friend had to take a knife in place of him. And as he plunges forward from anger, Juliet speaks to the sun in her room, solitary and ignorant of all that's taking place outside. She urges the unending day to be quick and yield the reins of the sky so that the night can come faster, the night that is lover's best friend, so that she can give herself to Romeo forever. But meanwhile, Romeo is steaming from the fury. He points his knife at Tybalt, looking down on them from above with eyes full of contempt. Romeo climbs up, and before Tybalt can even prepare his knife, Romeo's steel finds his skin. He slowly loses his feet as Benvolio urges Romeo to run away. And so he does. This murder will surely cost his life if Prince finds him here. Meanwhile, as blood-stained Romeo sits alone in the streets, away from any unwanted gaze, Juliet continues her dialogue with the knight. Her soul is plunged out of this world so that she can talk to anything she likes. So she urges the night to bring her lover, and turn him into stars once she dies, to fill the night with Romeo, so that all fall in love with the mysterious and faint shining of stars and moon and forget the forever blazing sun. Back in the streets, Prince has arrived with Capulets and Montagues gathered around him. Benvolio tells them the truth, but Tybalt's companion calls him a Montague and a liar. The price turns to Capulets at first, who demand justice, and then to Montagues, who justify Romeo's actions. Finally, the prince makes the decision. Romeo is to be exiled from Verona, and no tears and no excuses can change his mind. There will be no sight of Romeo in this city from this day. Flashing forward, we see Juliet again. The nurse comes into the room. Dark words are about to come from her mouth, and she's weary to let them out. Finally, she finds her voice and tells her about Tybalt's death. Juliet is confused at first. Her mind, which has been concentrated solely on a positive future, fails to comprehend the terror of her words. But eventually, the nurse manages to convey all to her: the murder of Tybalt and the banishing of Romeo. Juliet covers her face. Peace is flushed down from her face in an instant. Contradictory thoughts clash in her head and smear each other. At first, a huge tide of despair conquers her mind, but as she examines the nurse's sentence word by word, she realizes that worse might have happened. She understands that Tybalt intended to kill Romeo, and now she can only be happy that worse news didn't come to her. Yes, the memory of her cousin's death will haunt her for a long time to come, but the thought of Romeo being alive is a relief. However, suddenly, the word banished gains more significance. and the abrupt relief turns to despair once more. The sincere and loyal nurse despises the sight of Juliet, swallowed by despair, so she vows to her to find Romeo wherever he is and bring him back to her tonight. Meanwhile, Romeo is in Friar Lawrence's cell. The banishment from Verona equals a death sentence for him, and all the attempts of the priest to convince him that banishment is dear mercy is futile. Before they can continue their heated conversation, however, a hard knock on the door halts their dialogue. Friar moves cautiously toward the door, asking who it is. Juliet's nurse comes into the cell. Hearing Juliet's condition from her mouth turns Romeo against himself. He has caused so much pain to his dearest love, and he intends to pay the price with his life. He takes the knife that took one life already and puts it beneath his chin. Tensions rise and Friar calls upon his powerful words to soothe Romeo's temporary insanity. His words are medicine as he tells Romeo of all things he should be grateful for. He's alive, escaped from death, and so is Juliet. Neither Tybalt nor Justice took his life, and now he can steal one single night and spend it with the love of his life. As Friar speaks, Romeo gradually turns sane. The priest also assures him that from tomorrow, after Romeo leaves Verona, they will find time to change Prince's mind, so that he can return and find the love of his life as untouched and as pure as now. And then nothing will stand between them. And so, Romeo spends that night with Juliet in secret. She flies to him whenever he enters the room and embraces him fiercely as if she wanted to become one with him so that they can be banished together, so that nothing can separate them. They have only one night, the night that equals 100 lifetimes, filled with sadness, sorrow, love, and passion altogether. Meanwhile, downstairs the Capulets are with Paris, who still wishes for Juliet's hand. These dark hours seem a possibility for him to further win her parents' hearts, and in that endeavor he succeeds. No one knows what's happening upstairs, of course. All think that Juliet's grief is pinning her to her bed, and unexpectedly, Lady Capulet proposes the solution. This Thursday she will wed Juliet to Paris, and this sudden wedding will surely cheer her up. Naturally, the valiant Paris is not of this world from happiness. He still doesn't win Juliet's heart, but that seems secondary to the lords and ladies' final approval. The night ends in a heartbeat. They convince themselves that the light spilling from the window is not daylight, but the blazing of some meteor, and the bird that sings outside is the nightingale. But sinking into this fantasy means death. So, after one last kiss, Romeo descends from the balcony in haste, leaving Juliet alone. But that bittersweet solitude doesn't go on for so long. As a terrible premonition creeps up on her slowly, Lord Capulet knocks lightly on her door and enters the room. Father tries to soothe his daughter's grim mood, saying that the tears cannot bring her cousin back. They have a better cause for weeping. The despicable Romeo is still alive. But enough talking about grief. She's to be married this Thursday to Paris, so that the darkness of the late will be flushed away by a sudden happy occasion. Juliet is in shock. She sensed in advance that something horrible was going to happen, and there it was. She will not marry Paris. When the time comes, it is only Romeo, whom she hates, who will become her husband. As she stands up, the nurse and her mother join them too. When she sees grimness on her daughter's face, she turns to her husband, asking whether the good news was delivered to Juliet or not. And once she understands that Juliet does not intend to go along with this marriage, she tries to lure her in with a tender voice and soft talk, but soon she starts calling Juliet names. Her unworthy daughter should consider herself blessed to marry a husband like Paris. Lady Capulet gets furious quickly after Juliet repels her first attack, but her face stays kind. So, from this mask comes threat after threat. She will be married. There is no other way. Juliet tries to oppose her, but to no avail. Lady Capulet speaks out her last words and stands up to leave. Juliet stands up with her, and after a brief stare down, she darts toward the door to run away. As they grapple her, the nurse speaks up to protect Juliet, and this infuriates Lady Capulet to the extent that she no longer pretends to be calm. However, this sudden outburst of anger is short. She calms down quickly, sits down on Juliet's bed, and tells her that she'll pardon her. If she won't marry, then so be it. Juliet, surprised by this unexpected turn, embraces her mother firmly, but soon Lady Capulet reveals the true meaning behind her words. Juliet might not marry, but if she does so, she will have to spend her days as a beggar in the streets. The girl tries to find some humanity in her mother, asking for a delay at least, but the mother stands up coldly and leaves. Lord Capulet won't help her, so the nurse is the only person she can turn to for help. After they stay alone in the room, she attempts to make her see the positive side of this all. Romeo will never be able to come back, and if does so, he will have to do it in secret. On the other hand, Paris is a good man. Even better than Romeo, and besides, Romeo is dead, banished, gone. Juliet replies to be sure that these words are spoken from the heart. And once she realizes that even the nurse is against her love, she pretends to be convinced. She asks the nurse to go down and tell her parents that she intends to confess her ill doings to Friar Lawrence today, and cause no more trouble. In the following scene, Friar Lawrence and Paris are discussing the upcoming marriage. Friar is a priest. He knows that Juliet will be married a second time if this marriage happens. He knows it's a sin and wants no part of it, so he trembles in advance behind the cover of his peaceful face. Suddenly, Juliet rushes into the cell and freezes in place. Paris stands up and tries to start a conversation with his future wife, but he knows nothing about Juliet. The last thing she needs and wants now is to speak with him. So, after several useless attempts to start a loving conversation, Paris realizes that she's here to confess to Friar Lawrence and leaves. However, first, he goes up to Juliet and kisses her heartlessly. Juliet stays still until he leaves and then wipes away her lips to get rid of that vile taste. Friar Lawrence is the only person who can rescue Juliet from her sorrow now. Juliet pleads for a way out of this terrible occasion, and if Friar tells her that there is none, then only one option will be left. She takes the knife from the table and assures Friar that using it as the one last remedy seems a far better option than betraying God and Romeo all at once. But that won't be necessary. The priest has an idea. He slowly takes the knife from her trembling hands and tells her that she will like what he has to say since she's so eager to put an end to her days. So, this is what he suggests. Juliet should go home now and pretend to be happy and blessed. Wednesday is tomorrow, so tomorrow night, just before the wedding, she will take a certain beverage. Her heart will stop for 42 hours when it runs through her veins, and after that, she will wake up as if from a pleasant sleep. In the meantime, everyone will think that she's dead. Capulets, according to their customs, don't bury their dead, they lay them in a tomb. So, he and Romeo will be there when she wakes up. Then, the lovers will move to Mantua. Friar will make sure that Romeo knows of this plan tomorrow morning as he will hurry to bring this message to him. She must be strong and faultless in this task. Juliet knows that love will be her armor and shield, so she leaves courageously, but abruptly she turns back to embrace the only man that showed her the way. And so, in the next scene, Juliet enters her house and apologizes to her parents for disobedience. She vows that from this day she'll do anything they require her to do. All are surprised by this sudden turnaround. Lady Capulet is so happy that she hastens the marriage, saying that she'll have everything done by tomorrow morning and no objections from Lord Capulet can change her mind. Juliet's pretentious smile turns to despair for only a moment, but she manages to maintain her sanity. She asks them to leave her alone tonight and says her farewells, leaving her family behind. As she walks toward her room, she feels a sudden chill of death flowing through her veins. She rushes back, seeking comfort, calling a nurse, but once she opens the doors, the house is empty and haunted. She runs outside and realizes that she must do this alone. Decisively and calmly she goes to her bed, where all the spirits of other characters lurk from the shadows as she reviews all the possibilities. This file might contain a real poison, she might wake up too early and the airless tomb might suffocate her lungs to death, or surrounded by the bones of her ancestors, she might lose her sanity. She fears all, and she trembles before those terrible possibilities, but eventually, she thinks of Romeo and realizes that living without him is terror above all. So she empties the vial and drifts into senseless sleep. In the morning, the nurse discovers her and screams in despair. She runs to Lord Capulet, who's speaking to Paris, and conveys the dark news. She runs outside, where Benvolio mourns Mercutio in solitude and brings Friar Lawrence to a seemingly lifeless Juliet. He rushes into the room and confirms her passing. With his holy words, Friar tries to calm Lady Capulet down, convincing her that Juliet is in peace now and all the better for her. He orders them to take her body to church and prepare her place in the tomb. Now, he must be quick to tell Romeo. And now, the tragedy begins. Benvolio, who overheard the news of Juliet's passing, goes to him first. Romeo embraces his friend firmly, not knowing what dark news he bears from Verona. He tells Benvolio of his dream, a strange dream where Juliet found him dead and revived him with her kiss to be an emperor. Then, with enlightened eyes, Romeo asks how everyone is back in Verona. Benvolio hesitates for a moment. He knows what this news will do to his dear friend. But eventually, the words are spoken. And so, Benvolio begs for forgiveness, as Romeo cannot believe his ears. The memories flash before his eyes as his friend tries to soothe his outburst of rage. And suddenly, Romeo is at peace. He is sure that Benvolio is deceived. The news that he brings is false, and if he has no message from Friar, then he should be gone. As his friend leaves, he climbs a wall, where a vial full of poison is stored, and looks at it with eyes full of hope. He must see it with his own eyes to believe it. Meanwhile, the family mourns their daughter as Friar rushes himself to Mantua, but finds only Benvolio seated alone. Romeo is already in Verona, inside the tomb where only Paris and one servant seat beside the body of Juliet. Once he glances at Romeo, he sends the servant away and grapples him to bring him to justice, but Romeo puts him to the ground and takes his knife. As they circle each other like two predators, Romeo raises his hands, offering peace, but Paris launches toward him. This time Romeo uses his knife, and so, within a heartbeat, Paris is on the ground bleeding, as his soul slowly leaves his body. Yet another blood is spilled. After Paris draws his final breath, Romeo raises his head to glance at Juliet, illuminating even the gloomiest darkness of death. Romeo makes his way toward his love, his wife that lays still, but her skin is still as fair as if she was alive. He mourns her, embraces her shoulders, kisses her lips, and uses his vial to drift away into the realm where they shall be unshackled. And so, after one last kiss, they will rest, be forever in peace and love. Soon, Juliet wakes up. The hand, embracing her lightly, seems oddly familiar, and the empty vial beside it smells of death. She rises on the stone, embracing her lover's lifeless body in the hollow tomb. The vial is empty to the last drop, so she kisses his lips in the hope that the liquor that remains on them helps her pass. Suddenly, Juliet hears voices coming from behind. She screams her lungs out. She must be quick, or have a life full of despair. Looking down below, she realizes that the dagger is her last remedy. And so, Friar Lawrence is the first to arrive at the dreadful scene, where the bodies of two lovers lay together, free at last.